I wasn't expecting to see him again, certainly not like this. Standing in the doorway of our house, suitcase in hand, as if he had always belonged there. He hadn't called ahead, no message, just appeared, calm and confident, the kind of presence that quietly fills a room. It took me a moment to recognize him fully. His shoulders broader, a slight stubble on his jaw, his gaze steady but softer somehow. Older, but still carrying that familiar trace of youth. My husband moved first, laughing, pulling his son into a warm hug, clapping backs like old friends reunited. I stayed by the kitchen counter, hands still damp from washing fruit, the hem of my robe brushing my knees. I wasn't sure what to do. Smile? Step forward? But he closed the space between us first, offering a brief, friendly hug. The touch was light, natural, yet it stirred something unexpected within me, a quiet awareness I hadn't felt in a long time. He said he was back for work, changing jobs, needing a place to stay temporarily. Everything sounded perfectly normal. My husband was pleased, happy to have his son nearby again. They caught up easily, talking about work and future plans, but I couldn't shake the feeling, that lingering glance he gave when my husband wasn't looking. It wasn't bold, it wasn't inappropriate, but it stayed with me, quietly. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. I told myself it was habit, but when choosing what to wear, I hesitated longer than necessary, selecting a fitted top instead of my usual loose sweaters. Nothing obvious, just small details. Downstairs, he was already in the kitchen, barefoot, a simple gray sweatshirt clinging to his frame, his hair damp from the shower, the light catching at the scruff along his jaw. "Didn't expect you up this early," he said casually, stirring sugar into his coffee. I smiled. "Could say the same to you." The words were casual, but the memory of that shared glance lingered quietly between us. Days passed. My husband buried himself in work, late calls, early meetings, and his son slipped back into the rhythm of the house as if he'd never left, helping out, fixing things, sharing easy conversations. On the surface, everything was perfectly ordinary, but under it, there was a quiet current, small moments when I caught myself watching him move through the house, feeling the shift in the air when he entered a room. One morning, while I stood stirring eggs, I sensed him behind me, close enough to feel his presence but without touching. He reached for a cup from the shelf, and I held my breath without thinking. "Smells good," he said softly. I nodded, focusing on the pan. It wasn't a moment anyone else would notice, but something inside me had. I told myself it was harmless, just a tension I hadn't noticed in a long time. But deep down I knew, this story between us had quietly started the moment he walked through the door. The days began folding into each other, quietly, smoothly, until it felt like he had always been part of this life again. My husband's schedule remained as chaotic as ever. Business dinners, phone calls at odd hours, polite smiles exchanged across the breakfast table before he disappeared into another day. But the house felt fuller now, louder, even in its quiet. His son moved through the rooms like someone who belonged, casually leaning against door frames, sharing meals without ceremony, offering help wherever needed. He laughed easily, made space for my husband's stories, nodded at the right moments. On the surface, nothing was out of place. And yet, I caught myself noticing him more than I should have. The strength in his arms when he worked in the garden, the way he absent-mindedly rolled up his sleeves, or brushed his hair back from his face when the warmth of the day. All these little things, I told myself, were just natural observations, harmless. But I felt the weight of my own awareness. It was late afternoon when the opportunity first appeared, not planned, not even intentional. My husband had called to say he would be working late again. Some last-minute meeting, some client needing extra time. His absence no longer surprised me. The words barely registered. The young man, no, the grown man, suggested we head into town. There was talk of fixing up the old terrace in the backyard, maybe planting something new. He offered to drive casually, a suggestion tossed out between bites of lunch. I agreed without thinking much. The drive into town was quiet, the radio humming low, the road smooth beneath us. We talked about simple things, the weather, repairs, plans for the garden. His voice steady and light, and I told myself that any undercurrent I felt was simply my imagination. The sky began to gray just as we parked. Inside the store, we wandered through aisles of supplies, nails, paint, soil, exchanging easy words. But I noticed every time our arms brushed lightly, every time he leaned just a little closer. It was on the drive back that something shifted. The rain arrived suddenly, tapping urgently against the windshield. We pulled into a small grocery parking lot and waited for the downpour to ease. For a while, neither of us spoke. He turned the radio down and leaned back in his seat. The quiet grew thick around us. I felt his gaze before I turned to meet it. He didn't look away. The space between us seemed smaller somehow, just the center console, the rain, the weight of unspoken words. He leaned in slightly, carefully, as if asking for permission. And when our faces met, it wasn't bold or rushed. It was the lightest brush, a quiet acknowledgement more than anything else. I could have turned away. I should have, but It was a moment, fragile and gentle, a simple connection that said everything without words. His hand found my face briefly, not in possession but in quiet recognition, a steadying touch. And when we pulled back, there was only silence, not regret, not apology, only the soft rhythm of the rain filling the space around us. I sat there still, hands clenched tightly together, my breath caught somewhere between memory and reality. He watched me, steady and calm, and I looked back, equally steady, equally uncertain. We drove home in silence. The rain softened. The world outside looked the same, but inside, something had shifted quietly beyond words. The morning after felt startlingly ordinary. The sun was sharp against the windows, coffee scented the kitchen air, but my mind remained caught in the quiet space of yesterday, the careful moment, the unspoken understanding that had passed between us. I half expected him to avoid me, but life, it seemed, had other plans. Half feared it, but when I walked outside, crossing the narrow stone path toward the garden, I saw him there, calm, focused, bending over the small flower beds, hands deep in the soil, sleeves rolled up past his elbows. There was not a hint of tension in his face.
Not a shadow of last night's uncertainty.
If it could even be called that. He straightened up when he noticed me, offered a nod, a soft, good morning. His voice even, polite. I answered back, equally measured, smiled the same way I always did, but my throat was tight. My fingers gripped the fabric of my robe where he couldn't see. I stood there longer than necessary, watching him adjust the position of a young plant, noticing the way his forearms tensed when he pressed down the earth, noticing every small detail. It would have been easier if he'd looked away, if he had shown any sign of discomfort, but he remained perfectly composed, the picture of ease, as if nothing between us had changed. And maybe that was the most disarming part of all, how naturally we both continued the performance of indifference, while underneath it all, my heart raced each time his eyes glanced up from under those lashes. I waited for it. Every shift of his weight, every lean forward, made my breath tighten, my body alert. But he never broke the unspoken rules we both clung to. He played his role so well that I almost questioned my memory of the night before. Almost. Later that afternoon, it was his idea to host a dinner. Casual, he said. A little something for the neighbors, a few of my husband's colleagues. I'll cook, he offered, flashing that easy smile that seemed to put everyone at ease. It's been too quiet here lately, he added. My husband was delighted. He praised his son's thoughtfulness, his ability to bring people together. He didn't notice the quiet pause in my chest, the faint flutter that rose at the thought of spending an evening watching him move through the kitchen, hearing his laugh thread its way through the house. I nodded along, agreed to help with the arrangements, even as a strange tension built quietly inside me. The evening arrived sooner than I expected. I chose my outfit carefully, a dark, simple dress that balanced elegance and modesty, soft fabrics beneath, a small private indulgence known only to me. I told myself it was just preparation for hosting, nothing more. But my hands lingered too long at the clasp of my necklace, adjusting, perfecting. The house glowed under warm lights. Music drifted softly from the living room speakers. Guests filled the space with light conversation and laughter, a comfortable buzz in the air. At the center of it all, there he was, moving easily between the stove and the counter, offering drinks, plating dishes, joking with the neighbors, his smile. I watched him laugh at my husband's stories, pour wine, share small jokes that disarmed even the most reserved guests. But every so often, in the middle of a gesture or a word, his eyes found mine, briefly, gently, and every time they did, I felt something inside me stir, something quiet, but impossible to ignore. I told myself it was nothing, just shared glances, an echo of a moment already past. But my heart didn't believe it. It leaned into the invisible thread between us, noticing the moments he moved a little too near, the air thickening each time. Dinner flowed easily, plates passed, glasses clinked, voices rising in laughter. And then, as if by chance, as if it meant nothing at all, his fingers brushed mine beneath the table. It was just the passing of a dish, a plate of roasted vegetables, a casual handoff. But for a fleeting moment, our hands touched, and something unspoken passed between us. Just long enough, pressed lightly against mine, a second longer than needed. A touch so brief it could have been missed by anyone else, but not by me.
Mij briskogt.
I felt a flush rise to my cheeks, my heartbeat speeding up. I told myself to pull away, but I stayed still, frozen in the uncertainty of that impossible contact. Across the table, my husband was telling a story, laughing, eyes fixed on the neighbor seated beside him. Oblivious. No one noticed. No one except me. I gripped the edge of my chair beneath the tablecloth, knuckles tightening, heart racing. The voice inside my head tried to reason with me, to write it off as a game, a harmless mistake, an accident, even. But my heart knew better. My heart had already chosen its side. After the guests left, after the last glass was rinsed and the last plate dried, I lay awake long after my husband's breathing settled into its steady rhythm beside me. My mind replayed that moment again and again. The briefness of the touch, the steady weight of his gaze across the room, the strange ache of wanting something I shouldn't. I told myself it was nothing, but I chose my clothes more thoughtfully the next morning. And I knew exactly why. It was my suggestion. I told myself it was practical, helpful, the natural thing to offer. He needed to handle some paperwork for his new job, appointments at the city office that he wasn't familiar with, and my husband, as usual, was too buried under meetings to even consider going along. The decision fell into place easily. My husband almost relieved as he passed the responsibility to me. Maybe you could go with him, he said casually over breakfast, not looking up from his emails. You know the process better than I do. I nodded before he finished the sentence, smiled. It wasn't until I was alone in the shower that the realization of my eagerness sank into me. I stood under the water longer than necessary, forehead resting against the tile, hands placed flat against the wall as if to gather my thoughts. I kept telling myself it was nothing, just a drive into the city, a favor, a task. But my hands hesitated when I chose what to wear. Not too formal, not too obvious. Dark jeans, a soft blouse that felt a little more careful in its choice than the others, a thin gold chain resting against my collarbone. Small details, nothing anyone else would notice. When he appeared at the door, keys in hand, waiting by the car, I felt the pull of something tighten inside me. His hair was still damp, the sleeves of his shirt casually pushed up to reveal his forearms. Effortless,
Familiar.
The drive began the way any drive might.
Windows slightly open, the sounds of the city mixing gently with the music from the radio.
Conversation started where it always did. Easy, harmless, about the errands ahead, the frustrations of city offices, the weather, the traffic. But somewhere between the first red light and the stretch of highway, the tone shifted. He asked about the books stacked on my bedside table, the ones I never spoke about at dinner. I told him about them, half laughing, half embarrassed. And he listened, truly listened, not just waiting for his turn to speak. His questions were soft, curious, thoughtful in a way that felt too personal for such a casual drive. I caught him glancing at me during one of my answers, and when our eyes met, he didn't look away. "You look different when you smile like that," he said finally, his voice so low it could have been lost in the hum of the engine. "When it's real." I didn't respond. I couldn't. I saw the hint of color in my cheeks reflected faintly in the side mirror.
My fingers curled against my lap, steady.
The city passed by outside, blurred by the light. I couldn't stop noticing the easy steadiness of his hands on the wheel, the subtle nearness between us. At the office, we checked in at the reception desk, only to be told there was a delay. An hour, maybe more. "We could wait here," I offered automatically, already sensing what he might suggest. "Or," he said with a tilt of his head, "we could find somewhere nearby, grab something to eat." The cafe he chose was tucked between two narrow buildings, its doorway half hidden under the canopy of a tree. Small tables, handwritten menus, the scent of fresh coffee lingering warmly in the air. We chose a table by the window, the quiet hum of other conversations filling the space without touching ours. He ordered a black coffee. I asked for tea. Neither of us really looked at the menu. Conversation flowed into softer places, not small talk exactly. Memories of his old apartment, childhood trips, and stories about how I met his father. There was a warmth to it, the kind of openness that grows between two people careful not to admit too much. At some point, I realized I had been leaning forward, my chin resting lightly on my hand. He watched as I tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. I caught the flicker of his gaze as it traced the curve of my neck, the momentary hesitation before he looked away. I felt the silence between us deepen, filling the small space with something unspoken. Neither of us acknowledged